In the year 2147, Earth was a place of wonders and worries. Cities glowed with neon lights, and machines did most of the work humans once struggled to do. People lived longer because of medical advances, and spaceships traveled between planets like buses on old Earth roads. But even in this world of progress, some things stayed the same, like love, pain, and choices that could change lives forever. Alexander Voss was one of the richest men alive. He'd owned Genus Corp, a company known for changing how people thought about life itself. His team worked on improving human bodies through science. They made people stronger, smarter, and healthier. Some said Alexander was a genius. Others called him dangerous. To him, it didn't matter what people thought. What mattered was his dream, to make humanity better than ever before. But there was someone who didn't share his dream, Evelyn, his wife. Evelyn had always been different from Alexander. While he dreamed of shaping the future, she believed in letting life happen naturally. She loved nature and simple things, gardens full of flowers, quiet walks under starry skies, and moments without distractions. When they first met, their differences seemed exciting. Over time, though, those differences grew into arguments. Evelyn thought Alexander cared more about his work than her, and maybe she was right. One evening, after another long fight, Alexander decided enough was enough. He couldn't keep living two lives, one with Evelyn and one chasing his dreams. Something had to give. That night, as rain fell outside their glass-walled home, he packed a small bag and walked toward the door. "Are you really leaving?" Evelyn asked softly. Her voice carried sadness but no anger. "Yes," Alexander replied without looking back. "I can't stay here anymore." Before stepping out, he turned slightly and saw her standing by the window. Her face was calm, almost peaceful, but her eyes told a different story. Pain lingered there, hidden behind years of disappointment. "You'll understand someday," she whispered, "why I couldn't follow your path." Her words stayed with him as he stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, cutting off his view of her. For a moment, he felt guilty. Was he doing the right thing? Should he have tried harder to fix their marriage? But then the guilt faded, replaced by determination. He reminded himself why he was leaving, to chase his vision of a perfect future. The next morning, Alexander boarded a spaceship bound for Elysium 9, a colony planet far away from Earth. It was a beautiful place, untouched by pollution or war. Scientists hoped it would become humanity's second home someday. For now, it was mostly empty except for researchers and pioneers like Alexander. As the ship lifted off, Alexander looked down at Earth shrinking below him. He felt a mix of excitement and emptiness. Excitement because he was starting fresh, building something new. Emptiness because part of him still missed Evelyn. He pushed those feelings aside. There was no room for weakness in his plans. Back on Earth, Evelyn watched the news about Alexander's departure. Reporters talked about how brave he was to leave everything behind for his dreams. They praised him as a hero. Evelyn just shook her head. If only they knew the truth. Days passed, and Evelyn began making plans of her own. Deep inside, she had feared this moment would come. The day Alexander chose his ambitions over their marriage. But she wasn't going to let it destroy her. Instead, she decided to take control of her future. Late one night, Evelyn visited a secret clinic hidden beneath an old warehouse. The clinic specialized in illegal procedures banned by governments around the world. One of these procedures allowed women to have children with enhanced traits, smarter, faster, stronger babies designed through advanced science. Evelyn knew the risks. If anyone found out what she was doing, she could face jail or worse. But she didn't care. This was her chance to create something meaningful, a family Alexander could never ignore. After months of tests and treatments, Evelyn received the news she had been waiting for. She was pregnant, with quadruplets, 4 babies, each carrying unique gifts shaped by cutting-edge genetics. These weren't ordinary children. They were miracles born out of both love and defiance. Over the next few years, Evelyn raised the quadruplets alone. She kept them hidden from the world, teaching them everything she knew. She wanted them to grow up strong, kind, and free from the greed she saw in people like Alexander. But deep down, she also hoped he would return someday. Maybe then he'd see the beauty in what she had created. Meanwhile, Alexander thrived on Elysium 9. He built labs, hired brilliant minds, and pushed the boundaries of science further than ever before. His name became famous across galaxies. Yet every so often, he'd think about Evelyn. Her final words haunted him. "You'll understand someday." What did she mean? Why had she sounded so sure? Little did Alexander know, the answers lay waiting for him back on Earth. Four extraordinary children who would soon turn his world upside down. 30 years had passed since Alexander Voss left Earth. In that time, he transformed Elysium Mine into a shining beacon of human achievement. The planet, once barren and cold, now sparkled with life. Glowing cities stretched across its surface, powered by clean energy sources like fusion reactors and solar satellites. Rivers flowed again thanks to advanced climate engineering, and forests grew where deserts once stood. It was a paradise, proof that humanity could conquer even the harshest environments. But for all his success, Alexander wasn't happy. Fame and wealth couldn't fill the void inside him. He missed Evelyn more than he cared to admit. Her face appeared in his dreams sometimes, always silent but watching him with those piercing eyes. And her last words echoed in his mind every day. "You'll understand someday." What did she mean? Why hadn't he understood yet? Alexander threw himself into his work to distract himself. He poured billions of credits into research projects aimed at improving human life. His company, Genus Corp, became the most powerful organization in the galaxy. They developed medicines that cured diseases thought to be incurable. They created implants that boosted intelligence and strength. Some called their work miracles, others saw it as tampering with nature. Despite the praise, Alexander felt restless. No matter how many breakthroughs he achieved, something still felt missing. Maybe it was guilt over leaving Evelyn, or maybe it was curiosity about what she'd done after he left. Whatever it was, it gnawed at him constantly. One evening, Alexander attended a gala celebrating the launch of his latest invention, a neural enhancer chip designed to unlock hidden parts of the brain. The event took place in a grand hall overlooking the city. Guests dressed in elegant outfits mingled while holographic displays showcased Genus Corp's achievements. Reporters hovered nearby, eager to capture quotes from the man everyone called the architect of tomorrow. As Alexander stood near a balcony, sipping champagne, a message blinked on his wrist communicator. At first, he ignored it. He got dozens of messages daily, but this one caught his attention. It wasn't addressed to Mr. Voss or CEO. Instead, it read simply, "To Alexander, come home." The message came encrypted using quantum technology, meaning only someone highly skilled or very rich could have sent it. Intrigued and slightly alarmed, Alexander stepped away from the crowd to examine it further. There was no signature, no explanation, just those three words. His heart raced. Who could have sent this? Could it be Evelyn? Was she reaching out after all these years? If so, why now? And what did she want? For days, Alexander debated whether to respond. Part of him wanted to ignore the message. It might be a trick or a trap. But another part couldn't let it go. Finally, he made up his mind. He would return to Earth and find out who had sent it. Traveling between planets used to take months or even years, but recent advances in wormhole technology changed everything. A new gateway system allowed ships to jump vast distances in mere hours. Alexander booked passage on the fastest vessel available and prepared for the journey. As the ship approached Earth, Alexander stared out the window, marveling at how different the planet looked. Gone were the polluted skies and overcrowded cities he remembered. Now, lush green landscapes covered much of the globe, thanks to massive environmental restoration efforts. AI systems managed resources efficiently, ensuring no area suffered neglect. Humanity seemed to have finally learned how to live in harmony with nature. When the ship landed, Alexander hired a driver to take him to his old estate. The mansion sat atop a hill overlooking the ocean, a symbol of his former life. As the car pulled up, he noticed the house looked abandoned. Windows were dark, and vines crept along the walls. Clearly, no one had lived there in years. Stepping inside, Alexander wandered through empty rooms filled with dust and memories. Old photographs lined the walls, showing happier times with Evelyn. Seeing them brought back emotions he buried long ago. For a moment, he considered leaving right then, but something stopped him. Deep down, he knew the message had led him here for a reason. Exploring the house, Alexander found clues hinting at Evelyn's whereabouts. Hidden behind a bookshelf in his study was a secret door leading to an underground lab. Inside, he discovered files detailing experiments conducted decades earlier. One file mentioned a remote facility located under the Arctic ice. The pieces began falling into place. Using coordinates from the documents, Alexander traveled north. The journey was long and grueling, but determination kept him going. When he finally arrived at the facility, guards greeted him cautiously before allowing entry. Their uniforms bore no insignia, suggesting secrecy. Inside, Alexander walked through sterile corridors until he reached a large observation room. Standing there, staring out at the icy landscape beyond the glass, was Evelyn. She looked younger than when he'd last seen her, thanks, no doubt, to anti-aging treatments, but her expression was colder, harder. "Evelyn," Alexander said softly, unsure how to begin. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze. "You came. I got your message," he replied. "What is this about?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied him carefully, as if trying to decide how much to reveal. Then she spoke. "I did something after you left. Something I never told anyone, not even you." "What are you talking about?" Alexander asked, feeling uneasy. Evelyn gestured toward a door at the far end of the room. "Come with me." Curious and wary, Alexander followed her. Beyond the door lay another lab, this one filled with advanced equipment. In the center stood 4 teenagers, 2 boys and 2 girls. They looked strikingly similar yet distinct, each radiating confidence and intelligence. "These are my children," Evelyn announced proudly. "Your children." Shock hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. Children? How was this possible? He stared at the teenagers, struggling to process what he was hearing. "They're quadruplets," Evelyn explained. "Born through experimental procedures banned by governments worldwide. I raised them in secret, protecting them from people like you." "People like me?" Alexander repeated, confused. "Yes," Evelyn snapped. "People who see humans as tools to be improved rather than individuals to be cherished. These kids aren't just smart, they're extraordinary. But they're also vulnerable. That's why I hid them." Alexander listened silently, overwhelmed by emotion. Guilt, awe, anger. They swirled together in his chest. He wanted to ask questions, demand answers. But one thing was clear. Evelyn had kept a monumental secret from him. And now, 30 years later, he was meeting his own flesh and blood for the first time. As he gazed at the quadruplets, Alexander realized his life was about to change again, in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Alexander stood frozen, his mind struggling to make sense of what Evelyn had just revealed. 4 teenagers, his children, stood before him, their eyes curious and sharp. They looked so alike yet distinct in their own ways. Each carried an aura of confidence that seemed unnatural for kids their age. Alexander felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: shock, guilt, pride, and even anger. How could Evelyn keep such a secret from him? And why now? Evelyn watched him closely, her expression unreadable. She gestured toward the quadruplets. "These are your children," she repeated softly. "They're not ordinary kids. I made sure of that." "What do you mean?" Alexander asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I used experimental procedures to give them abilities beyond normal humans," Evelyn explained. "Things like enhanced intelligence, physical strength, and other gifts. But don't worry, they're still human. Just better versions of us." Alexander took a step closer to the teenagers. He studied their faces carefully, trying to find traces of himself or Evelyn in them. The boy on the left had piercing blue eyes, just like his. The girl next to him shared Evelyn's calm demeanor. Another boy stood with his arms crossed, exuding quiet confidence. And the last girl smiled faintly, as if amused by the situation. "This is Leora," Evelyn said, pointing to the smiling girl. "She can read minds and influence thoughts." Leora nodded politely, her smile widening as if she already knew what Alexander was thinking. "That's Kale," Evelyn continued, gesturing to the confident boy. "He's an inventor. Give him scrap metal, and he'll build you a spaceship." Kale smirked, clearly proud of his reputation. "The one with Evelyn's eyes is Nyx," she added. "She has the power to heal living tissue. Broken bones, wounds, illnesses. Nothing stands in her way." Nyx gave a small wave, her movements graceful and deliberate. "And finally, Rin." Evelyn pointed to the boy with Alexander's eyes. "He's a strategist. His brain works faster than any computer. If there's a problem, they'll solve it before anyone else realizes it exists." Ryan tilted his head slightly, studying Alexander with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Alexander stared at them, overwhelmed. These weren't just children, they were prodigies, geniuses, miracles born out of forbidden science. Part of him wanted to be proud, but another part felt uneasy. What would happen if the world found out about them? Would they be hunted, exploited, or worse? "Why didn't you tell me?" Alexander asked, turning back to Evelyn. His tone was harsher than he intended. "Because I knew exactly what you'd do." Evelyn shot back, her voice rising. You take them away from me, lock them up in some lab, and experiment on them until they became nothing more than tools for your grand vision of humanity. Is that what you want? No, Alexander protested. I wouldn't. Don't lie to yourself, Evelyn interrupted. You've spent your whole life trying to improve humanity. Don't act like you wouldn't see these kids as your greatest experiment yet. Her words hit hard. Was she right? Had his obsession with perfection blinded him to the dangers of his work? For years, he justified his actions by telling himself he was helping people. But now, standing face to face with his own creations, he wasn't so sure anymore. The room fell silent. The quadruplets exchanged glances, sensing the tension between their parents. Finally, Leora stepped forward. It's okay, Dad, she said gently. Her voice was soothing, almost hypnotic. We're not mad at you. We understand why Mom kept us hidden. She was protecting us. Alexander blinked in surprise. You know who I am. Of course, Leora replied with a soft laugh. We've known about you our whole lives. Mom showed us pictures and told us stories. We just never thought we'd meet you. Her words softened Alexander's heart. Despite everything, these kids sounded sincere. They weren't angry or resentful. They simply accepted him as their father. It was both humbling and terrifying. So, what happens now? Alexander asked, looking at Evelyn. What do you expect me to do? I'd expect you to leave us alone, Evelyn said firmly. We've survived without you this long. We don't need you interfering in our lives. But I'm their father, Alexander argued. Don't I have a right to know them, to help raise them? You lost that right when you walked out on me, Evelyn countered. Besides, raising them means keeping them safe. Do you really think you can do that? Or will you drag them into your dangerous world? Alexander opened his mouth to respond but stopped. He couldn't deny that his life was risky. As the head of Genus Corp, he had enemies everywhere, rival companies, governments, even activists who opposed his work. Bringing the quadruplets into that world could put them in grave danger. Before he could say anything else, alarms blared throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, casting eerie shadows across the walls. What's happening? Alexander demanded. Evelyn cursed under her breath. They found us. Who? Alexander asked, panic rising in his chest. Genus Corp, Evelyn replied grimly. I knew this day would come eventually. Someone must have tracked your ship here. As if on cue, loud bangs echoed from above. Footsteps thundered through the corridors, growing louder with each passing second. We have to go, Evelyn said urgently. Now. She grabbed Alexander's arm and pulled him toward a hidden exit. The quadruplets followed closely behind, moving with practiced efficiency. Clearly, they prepared for situations like this before. They raced down narrow tunnels, dodging falling debris and avoiding patrols. At one point, Cal stopped to disable a security drone using a gadget he pulled from his pocket. Nix healed the cut on Rin's hand after he tripped over a pipe. Through it all, Leora stayed calm, guiding them with directions she seemed to pluck straight from the guards' minds. Finally, they reached a large hangar where a sleek spacecraft waited. Evelyn ushered everyone inside, then sealed the door behind them. Where are we going? Alexander asked as the engines roared to life. Away from here, Evelyn replied. Somewhere safe, somewhere no one will find us. The ship lifted off just as Genus Corp forces breached the hangar. Explosions rocked the facility below, sending flames shooting into the sky. As they soared into space, Alexander looked back at the planet shrinking beneath them. For the second time in his life, he was leaving Earth, but this time he wasn't alone. This time he had a family. Whether he liked it or not, his future was tied to theirs. And deep down, he wondered if Evelyn was right. Could he truly protect them? Or would his ambition destroy them instead? The spacecraft sped through the vast emptiness of space, its engines humming softly. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but quiet. Alexander sat in a corner, staring at his hands as if they held all the answers to the chaos unfolding around him. Evelyn piloted the ship with steady focus, her eyes fixed on the controls. Behind them, the quadruplets huddled together, whispering among themselves. Alexander couldn't stop thinking about what Evelyn had said earlier. You lost that right when you walked out on me. Her words stung more than he cared to admit. He wanted to argue, to defend himself. Deep down, he knew she was right. Leaving her had been selfish, a decision driven by ambition rather than love. And now, 30 years later, he was paying the price. Where are we going? Alexander finally asked, breaking the silence. To a safe house, Evelyn replied without looking back. A place I set up years ago, just in case something like this happened. And then what? Alexander pressed. Do we just hide forever? What about Genus Corp? They won't stop until they find us. They won't find us, Evelyn said firmly. Not if we're careful. But how long can we keep running? Alexander shot back. They have resources, technology, everything. Sooner or later, they'll track us down. Evelyn sighed and turned to face him. I don't know, okay? I don't have all the answers. But I do know one thing. I won't let them take my children, not while I'm alive. Her determination silenced Alexander. For the first time, he saw the depth of her resolve, the lengths she'd gone to protect their kids. It made him feel small, insignificant. He'd spent decades building an empire, yet here she was, risking everything for 4 teenagers who barely knew him. As the hours passed, the tension eased slightly. The quadruplets began opening up, sharing stories about their lives in the Arctic lab. Leora described how she used her telepathy to eavesdrop on Evelyn's thoughts when she was younger. Kel proudly showed off a miniature robot he built using spare parts from the facility. Nix demonstrated her healing powers by mending a scratch on Alexander's hand, her touch warm and soothing. Rin explained how he predicted outcomes based on patterns, often warning the others of potential dangers before they occurred. For the first time, Alexander felt a connection to them. These weren't just extraordinary beings, they were his children. Despite everything, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. But the moment of peace didn't last long. A sudden jolt rocked the ship, throwing everyone off balance. What was that? Alexander exclaimed, gripping the edge of his seat. Trouble, Evelyn muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. She glanced at a monitor displaying their surroundings. A fleet of ships was closing in fast, Genus Corp vessels armed with weapons. How did they find us? Alexander demanded, panic rising in his chest. It doesn't matter, Evelyn snapped. Just hold on. She pushed the ship to maximum speed, weaving through asteroid fields and debris clouds to evade their pursuers. Laser blasts streaked past, narrowly missing the hull. Alarms blared inside the cockpit, adding to the chaos. We need to fight back, Kel shouted, already working on a plan. If I can rig the ship's defenses, we might stand a chance. Do it, Evelyn ordered. Leora, see if you can read their intentions. Maybe you can figure out their next move. Leora closed her eyes, concentrating deeply. After a few moments, she opened them again. They're planning to surround us. If we don't act soon, we're trapped. Then we act now, Rin said calmly. Mom, head straight for that cluster of asteroids ahead. We'll use them as cover. Evelyn nodded and steered the ship toward the rocky formation. As they approached, Cal activated a makeshift weapon system he'd rigged together. Beams of energy shot out, striking 2 enemy ships and disabling them instantly. Yes, Cal cheered, pumping his fist in triumph. Don't celebrate yet, Evelyn warned. There were still too many of them. Nick stepped forward, her hands glowing faintly. Let me try something, she said. Closing her eyes, she focused her energy outward. The ship's damaged systems began repairing themselves at an astonishing rate. Shields strengthened, engines roared louder, and even the hull patched itself up. That's incredible, Alexander whispered, watching in awe. With their ship fully operational again, Evelyn led a daring escape maneuver. She zigzagged through the asteroids, forcing the enemy ships to break formation. One by one, they fell behind, unable to keep up. Finally, after what felt like hours, the last Genus Corp vessel disappeared from view. The family breathed a collective sigh of relief. We did it, Evelyn said, slumping into her seat. For now, at least. For now, Alexander echoed grimly. But this isn't over. They'll come after us again. And next time, they might not fail. Evelyn nodded. We'll deal with that when it happens. Right now, we need to get to the safe house. As the ship continued its journey, Alexander found himself reflecting on everything that had transpired. His life had changed so drastically in such a short time. From being a billionaire visionary to discovering he had 4 superhuman children, nothing seemed real anymore. Yet, amidst the confusion and danger, there was something undeniable, a bond forming between him and the quadruplets. Later that night, as everyone slept, Alexander stayed awake, staring out the window at the endless expanse of stars. He thought about Evelyn's sacrifices, the risks she'd taken to protect their children. He thought about the gifts, or curses, the quadruplets possessed and the responsibility that came with them. Most of all, he thought about his own choices. Had he truly been wrong to pursue perfection? Or was there a way to balance ambition with humanity? He didn't have answers, only questions. But one thing was certain. Whatever happened next, he couldn't run away from it. Not this time. The safe house was hidden deep within the mountains of a remote planet, far from prying eyes. It was a small, self-sustaining bunker equipped with everything needed to survive for years: food supplies, water purifiers, solar panels, and even a greenhouse filled with lush plants. Evelyn had prepared it years ago, anticipating that one day they might need a place to hide. When they arrived, exhaustion hung heavy in the air. Everyone collapsed onto couches or beds, too tired to speak. But Alexander couldn't rest. His mind raced with thoughts about what had happened and what would happen next. Genus Corp wouldn't give up easily. They'd already proven how far they were willing to go to capture the quadruplets. And now, more than ever, Alexander felt torn between two worlds: his old life as a visionary leader and his new role as a father. The next morning, tensions flared again. Evelyn called a meeting in the main living area, where everyone gathered around a wooden table. The quadruplets sat together, their expressions calm but alert. Evelyn stood at one end, while Alexander paced nervously near the window. "We're safe for now," Evelyn began, her voice steady but firm. "But we can't stay here forever. Sooner or later, Genus Corp will find us." "What do you suggest we do?" Alexander asked, stopping mid-pace to face her. "We fight back," Evelyn replied without hesitation. "We prepare ourselves. Teach the kids how to use their powers better. Make sure they're ready for whatever comes next." "And then what?" Alexander shot back. "Keep running? Hide until we die?" "No," Evelyn said sharply. "We take the fight to them. Expose what Genus Corp is really doing. Show the world the truth." Alexander shook his head. "That's suicide. You think people will leave us over a company as powerful as Genus Corp? They'll crush us before we even get started." "Then what's your plan?" Evelyn demanded. "Just sit here and wait for them to come knocking." Before Alexander could respond, Leora spoke up. "Dad, Mom, maybe there's another way." Everyone turned to look at her. She hesitated for a moment, then continued. "What if we didn't have to choose between fighting and hiding? What if we found a middle ground?" "A middle ground?" Rin asked skeptically. "Like what?" Leora glanced at her siblings before answering. "We've been talking about this. We don't want to spend our lives running or fighting. We want to live normal lives. Well, as normal as possible. Maybe we can negotiate with Genus Corp, offer them something they can't refuse." "Negotiate?" Alexander repeated, incredulous. "You think they'll listen to reason?" "They might," Nix chimed in. "If we show them we're not afraid to fight back, they'll respect us. But if we also offer them something valuable, like knowledge or technology, they might agree to leave us alone." Kel nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. We're smart. We can figure out a solution that works for everyone." Evelyn frowned, clearly unconvinced. "And what happens when they betray us?" "Because they will. Trust me, I know how these companies operate." "But what if they don't?" Alexander interjected. For the first time, he sounded hopeful. "What if we actually pull it off? If we play our cards right, we might be able to protect the kids without destroying ourselves in the process." Evelyn stared at him, her eyes narrowing. "Are you seriously considering this? After everything they've done?" "I'm considering survival," Alexander replied firmly. "For all of us. Isn't that what you wanted? To keep the kids safe?" "Yes, but—" "No buts," Alexander interrupted. "This isn't just about you anymore, Evelyn. It's about them." He gestured toward the quadruplets. "They deserve a chance to live their lives freely, not locked away in some bunker." The room fell silent. The weight of Alexander's words settled over everyone. Finally, Evelyn sighed and sank into a chair. "Fine, let's hear your plan." Over the next few days, the family worked tirelessly to prepare. Kale built gadgets designed to disable enemy ships and drones. Nix practiced healing techniques on simulated injuries, ensuring she could handle real combat scenarios. Lyra honed her telepathy, learning how to block intrusions and project illusions. Rin studied patterns and strategies, mapping out potential outcomes for every possible confrontation. Meanwhile, Alexander reached out to trusted allies within Genus Corp, people who still owed him favors or shared his vision of improving humanity ethically. He proposed a meeting under neutral terms, promising to share groundbreaking research in exchange for immunity for the quadruplets. To his surprise, Genus Corp agreed. A delegation was sent to meet them on a neutral space station orbiting a distant moon. The family traveled there cautiously, unsure whether this was a trap or an opportunity. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room aboard the space station. Representatives from Genus Corp sat across the table, their faces unreadable behind sleek visors. Alexander introduced the quadruplets, explaining their unique abilities and offering samples of their genetic data as proof of their potential. "We're not asking for much," Alexander said, his tone measured but confident. "Just let my family live in peace. In return, we'll provide insights that could revolutionize medicine, engineering, and beyond." One of the representatives leaned forward. "And why should we trust you?" "Because you have no choice," Evelyn answered coldly. "If you try to take us by force, we'll destroy everything. Every file, every sample, all gone. You'll lose access to the greatest discovery of the century." The representatives exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Finally, the leader nodded. "Very well, we accept your terms. But mark my words, if you cross us, there will be consequences." Alexander extended his hand, sealing the deal. As they shook, he felt a mix of relief and unease. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Back at the safe house, the family celebrated cautiously. While the immediate threat had passed, none of them believed Genus Corp would honor the agreement indefinitely. Still, for the first time in years, there was hope. Alexander looked around at the quadruplets, marveling at how much they'd grown. Not just physically, but emotionally. They weren't just his children. They were survivors, fighters, thinkers. And despite all the challenges ahead, he knew they'd face them together. As the sun set outside, casting golden light through the windows, Alexander made a silent promise to himself. No matter what happened next, he would protect his family. Not because it was expected of him, but because it was the right thing to do.